I am Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susie.
And we're paranormal specialists who live in the most haunted city on earth, Savannah, Georgia. Every day is Halloween in our line of work, so join us as we spin true tales of haunts, murders, and disturbing Savannah history. I'm Madison.
I'm Chris.
And welcome to the most haunted city on earth. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the most haunted city on earth. My name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susie.
And today we have a very special guest with us, a native Savannian. We have Jessica with us. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Jessica Schroyer, and I was born here in Savannah some years ago. Lived in the Crest Hill area, moved away when I was about 12, and then came back in the late 2018 or 2008, 2009.
Awesome. Cool. So Jessica actually reached out to us after we talked about the Owens Thomas house. And so she had messaged us on our website and said, hey, I've worked for the Telfair Academy, Owens Thomas house, and, the Forsyth Park and all that. I have a ton of experiences. Can I tell you about them? And we're like, absolutely, you can. So she's here today to talk about that. But before we get into that, I do have a few announcements to start us out with. So first, I do want to thank a few new para-junkies that we have. So we want to thank Katie Glotz, Elizabeth Elliott, Kyle Belvins, Ellen Etheridge, and Emily Barnett. Thank you guys so much for becoming para-junkies. We really appreciate all of your support. It really helps us keep doing what we're doing right now. So if you do want to become a para-junkie, you can find us over on Patreon. And like I said, it does help us, keep expanding, keep evolving the podcast and things like that, along with you getting extra episodes. You get lots of new, just various posts that we think of. And a lot of times we'll just post random photos that we're like, hey, we've never shown anybody this ghost photo. So they get it on Patreon. It's really fun. A really great community over there if you're looking for other fellow paranormal enthusiasts and whatnot. Also, just to let y'all know, we are going to be doing a break, a mid-season break starting on December 17th, and we will be back on New Year's Day. Essentially, we are going to take this time, to spend time with our families for the holidays and whatnot, and we're going to be traveling, of course, to go see everybody. So we're going to take a little break for that, but during that time, we are going to be as well kind of restructuring things and, trying to see how we want to redirect the podcast and whatnot. So we're going to be coming back in the new year with lots of really cool content. Lots of really different kind of structural ideas, so definitely stick around for that. But take the time to, maybe catch up on some of our older episodes and things like that. So with that, though, Jessica, would you like to tell us a little bit about your history with the Telfair?
I would love to. I worked with, when I moved back here, I had actually worked with another company, big company, won't be named in town. They were like last one hired, first one fired, so they let me go. So I had to find a couple other little odd jobs, and I ended up at the Owens Thomas house. My official title was a customer service rep, but I basically sold tickets to the tours out of the gift shop. And y'all had spoken, I know, last week about the feeling in the slave quarters. And it didn't look then like it does now. They've done an amazing job now but it still had one side of it was set up as I think they called it the interpretation gallery. So that's where they would come in the shop, buy tickets, and then go into the interpretation gallery to hear like a brief sort of intro to how the slaves or the enslaved people had lived, and then what they would be seeing in the house. And then they would cross the garden and go into the house. And so I worked in the gift shop on the other side, but it was 2 stories. Now I think the gift shop's underneath, but anyway, it was 2 stories, and so we would have to go in, unlock, and then I could go upstairs to use the bathroom or whatever. So y'all had talked, like I said last week, about it and how there was definitely like a feeling in the house. Now I don't claim to be clairvoyant or anything like that, but I tend to be somewhat sort of clairaudient, where I can hear things going on. So like I can walk into, and I always heard stuff in the slave quarters, like always. I would just go in, and it was almost like you were hearing somebody whispering behind you, but like if you turned to be like, who is that? There was nobody there. or you would hear like a conversation going on, but like almost like somebody didn't see you there, didn't hear you there, didn't notice you were there. And I've done that my whole life, but it was very, very much so in the slave quarters. So occasionally I would have to go upstairs, like I said, to use the bathroom or get something, and I would always hear these conversations going on. So at one point I was in there by myself, because I would go in and open up the shop, like turn off the alarm, get my cash box ready, things like that, and it might not necessarily be the shop manager there or anything like that. And so I went upstairs to do something, came back down, didn't hear anything, whatever, and then I could hear what sounded like a full-on, it was pretty loud because I could hear it downstairs, a full-on conversation going on. And I was like, I didn't see anybody up there, but maybe they were in the office or whatever, but I turned off the alarm when I came in, so I know nobody came in after me. So I walked, and I could hear it, and it was like almost like a hum, but like you could hear the undulating noises or like speech patterns. And so I went upstairs. I was going up the stairs because the stairs kind of go up, they turn, they go up like 3 times, kind of at a landing. And I went up, and as I got closer, it started to get like louder and louder, like almost like bees humming, like zzz, but like I said, the undulating noises. And as I got to the top step, it just stopped. And it was like a dead silence, I know, but like complete silence. And I'm like, okay. And there's nobody outside. I can see out the windows. There's nobody out there. I've already opened up all the windows. No one's out there. No one's in the garden. There's not a car going by or a trolley going by or anything like that, because we heard those all the time. Mm-hmm. And I was like, all right. And I kind of took a couple steps back, and I turned away, and I turned a couple steps back and started to go down, and it started to get louder and louder again. And I'm like, am I stepping on something? So I kept going up, and every time I'd hit that top step, it would stop. And again, just complete silence. So I was like, all right, so I'm just going to go downstairs. I'm like, I don't know what it is. I had heard that, other people heard things, whatever. It didn't sound menacing. I didn't feel scared or anything. And so I was coming down one landing, and as I turned the very bottom to go into the shop bottom, I heard something much louder, and it said, "She's gone." And I was like, okay then. And like I said, I'm not scared, but it was definitely alarming. And I was like, okay. So I just went out the shop, I locked the shop, went across the garden into the house, because by then people were in the house, my director and things were in the house. And I was like, all right, I'm just gonna wait till the rest of the shop staff come. And we went back over there, and I mean, they said, we've never heard that, but we've heard like conversations going on and things like that. So I was like, okay then.
Oh my goodness.
But it was always just a feeling of like, it wasn't a scary feeling or even like a foreboding feeling, but it was always just like you're kind of in the middle of something that maybe you shouldn't be a part of, or that you're not involved in, and you're kind of just like, okay. And you'd have to kind of block it out. And then when we were really busy, you didn't hear any of it, of course. But when we were in there by ourselves, it was definitely like, literally like conversations going on that you couldn't be a part of.
So it's so interesting because, like, people tend to think, like, when you have a paranormal experience, it's going to be this, like, super dramatic, scary horror movie encounter, but it's really...
I don't want it to be that.
Right. But it's, like, it's usually not like that. I find it interesting that you said that it felt like it was a conversation you weren't supposed to be a part of. Because a while back, we had talked about an experience that I had in the Davenport house, where basically I was in the house by myself in between tours in the middle of the night. And
always fun.
Yeah. And so I was taking JT on a FaceTime tour of the house because it's so creepy at night. So
they all are at night. Yeah.
They are. But basically I had gone up to the second floor landing, and when I turned on my flashlight, there was a little boy standing at the end of the hall.
Oh, hello.
And so JT, of course, was panicking. He's like, "Oh my God, like, what is that? That's a ghost? Like, are you kidding me?" And how I explained it to him, because he was like, "How are you so calm right now?" I'm like, "For one, I see this a lot. So it's, it's really not a big deal for me." But I had the same feeling, where basically I was just like, it felt like he did not want me there. Like, I walked in and he was like, nope, you're not supposed to be here right now.
What are you doing here?
Exactly. So, I feel like they start to account for the routines that, the employees have, because typically, people shouldn't be up on those upper floors in the Davenport house. I was, allowed to, but
Right.
most of the time, most of the other people who would do that position, they didn't go up there, and guests weren't allowed up there. So I'm sure it's the same kind of thing where those spirits are accounting for your routine.
Right. They knew we were there. We weren't typically messing with them or anything like that. And at that time, in the slave quarters, the second half where the interpretation gallery was, there was an upstairs, but no one went up there. Now I think you can go up there.
Yes.
But
Yeah, you can.
I haven't been in a minute. So, but at that time it was roped off and it said, we're currently curating this or renovating it or whatever. But this was the second floor of the shop, which would have been still part of that slave quarters. And I think now it is. So, but yeah, it was almost like there were people up there talking that maybe when I came up, they were like, oh, be quiet, someone's
Right.
here. And I wasn't normally there. They knew the other two ladies that worked there, I guess. That sounds weird. They probably
No,
knew who
it's
they
true.
were, yeah. And they were always upstairs. I rarely went upstairs except to go to the bathroom or whatever, So after that, I did not go upstairs to go to the bathroom by myself anymore. I just went outside to the garden bathroom and I was like,
Right.
eh. I mean, it didn't scare me, but it was definitely like, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah.
And they just went on after I left. Oh, she's gone. And I was like, okay, yes, I'm gone. I'm gone for sure.
It's really fascinating because I think I've actually heard in many accounts they're gone, she's gone. People catching it on EVPs, people being able to suggest that ghosts got business. They're doing something.
They're doing something.
And our interruption and intrusion causes them to stop whatever they're doing. So
Yeah.
when a person leaves, and it's like that seems like almost a category of ghost of its own, because in a lot of experiences are about ghosts seeking human contact and human interaction, but there's a variety of ghosts that are just waiting for us to go away and just kind of like
Right.
like they're holding their breath while we're around, and then when we leave they just
Absolutely.
exhale a big sigh of relief because we can go back to whatever we were doing.
We were doing, yeah. And I think, and I know sometimes it's more of like an imprint in time type thing.
Sure. Yeah.
I do not think this was that. Do I think there are some of those? Yeah, absolutely. Where you see like the same thing at the same time, all the time, whatever. That's more of an imprint, and they don't really seem to notice you. But I mean, they definitely were like, she's gone.
And we've spoken about this in the past that like residual hauntings, imprint hauntings, they can have an intelligent aspect. They can become intelligent in a moment, and it's possible things like running a routine, and then stopping because of some electromagnetic disturbance, which is the human body. You show up and you're disrupting the energy that they're utilizing and using to put on their daily performance.
Right.
And so
And your level of energy, too.
yeah, exactly.
Some people are like more hyped about it, some people are not.
Some people are batteries. Some people will give energy, and other people will take it. And so I can see where the intelligent aspect is we're stopping. We have to, we're waiting to get back to
Like, who is this and what are they
the
doing?
almost mindless existence. The difference between being like a mindless pattern and a mindful awareness, being dead shouldn't be interrupted. It's like we're doing
They're
our thing.
living
We're
their
doing our
best
thing. We're doing
afterlife.
exactly. And it's like, look, I'm trying to get these really weird pants on and off, and it's hard because the 1800s we didn't have zippers. And
Right. What am I doing?
what am I doing? Why is this happening?
I mean, we had a lot of people who would say like they just had that feeling in the slave quarters. But I agree with like what y'all had said a couple weeks ago that, I think they've done an amazing job of really being very true and very authentic and very, very respectful.
Very respectful.
Of
I
how
just
they've
recently
done
went there for the first time in ages, and the revamp. They have like a slave family tree on the wall.
Oh, see, I
which
haven't
is
seen that yet.
fascinating. All these names of people, and it's just like, these were the fact that we can trace and find all of this history, and it had been buried for so long, and actively we lived in shame.
Yeah.
And we should. It should be
And
shameful.
I think that they own it.
Yes,
I
yes,
mean,
that's exactly what happened.
They
Yeah.
say like, yes, we understand this happened, and how can we can never change it, but how can we respectfully honor it and represent it and honor these people who basically dedicated their lives to another family for how long?
Right.
Exactly.
You know, and
Exactly. Generations.
and I
yeah.
feel like as far as for generational wise, I feel like the Owens Thomas House. I mean, I'm kind of biased because it's like my favorite house museum, but along with the Academy Building. But I think that they had so many lifetimes. The house itself had so many lifetimes and they're able to really honestly represent each lifetime.
Absolutely.
To say, like, this person lived here at this time, and then it was a boarding house, and then it was apartments. And we had people that would come in and say, oh, yeah, I lived in this apartment.
Yeah.
It was this part here, which happened at the Forsyth Park Inn, too, because it was a boarding house at one time as well. But, yeah, so it was neat to be able to have those interactions. And we would always get people with the pictures of, oh, I see this in the window, or I see this imprinted in the wall. And I'm like, I mean, I never saw anything at the Owens Thomas House. It was always hearing something. You know, always. My mother-in-law was a housekeeper there at one time, and she consistently, when she would be there, because they would go in first in the morning and vacuum and things like that from the evening before, and she would consistently hear someone calling her name. And it wasn't a name that, like, I don't want to repeat it here because she didn't tell me I could tell her name, but it was not a name you would, sue.
Associate with.
It wasn't,
right.
like, and it's certainly not one that you would associate with that time period.
Sure.
Absolutely.
So she was like, yeah, they just follow me around the house. And I'm like, just cleaning up, just doing this, just doing my job. And then she'd leave, And it was similar with that. I had been closing up the house one night because we would close up the shop. I would go in the house, turn off all the lights, close up all the shutters and things like that. And I would have to go in room to room. It might be different now, again, this was a while ago, but you would go into the rooms and I'd have to go past the sensors because they had the little barriers. I think at one point they had even like plexiglass hanging up at one point, but this time I had to go past the barriers to turn off like the side lamps, the overhead lamps, whatever. And you would always, I knew that if I went out on this side, I would set off the sensor, like ding, someone's in the room. So I walked in, ding, I heard my own ding, knew it was my ding, walked down on the other side of the sensor, came out on the other side, ding, coming out, went into the next room. That room didn't have a sensor because it was just a little, kind of an alcove. I think at that time they had it set like a nursery or a nurse's room space, and like a wet nurse. And I heard a ding in the other room, and I was like, now I know everyone is gone. So I kind of went back, and I'm like, hello, who's back there? I looked back, and I went in, and the light was back on. And I was like, all right, now, we're not doing this. So I go back in, turn off the light, came back out, heard my own ding. Like, I'm counting the dings. I'm like, okay, who's here? It's me. So I go in, went across the hall to turn off those lights, because you had, like, a system. You do these rooms on one side, turn, go down, then you go down the elevator, down the stairs. So I'm in the other room, and I've heard my dings, and I'm walking across down the hall to the next room, to the Lafayette bedroom, and I hear ding, ding. So that means somebody's like back and forth in one spot. And I go back in, and another lamp is on. And I'm like, all right, look, I need to turn these lights off, and I'll be back in the morning, or someone will be back in the morning. It might be me, and I named the person who's normally there first thing in the morning. She might be here, so I'm just going to turn these lights off, and then I'm going to leave, and hopefully they won't be back on in the morning. And I just left, and I left it at that. But it was always kind of that, they weren't hurting me. I didn't feel scared, nothing like that. I'd heard a rumor one time that somebody had gone in, and this is when they had the plexiglass at one point. It was a rocking chair, and it was actually on the front side of the plexiglass. And I'm like, how did somebody do that? Because you'd have to lift it up over the top of it, or I guess go under it. But
yeah,
I don't know. That was a rumor. I don't know anything about that one. But
oh boy,
yeah, the dings were consistent. That was something that happened quite a bit. And I would just be like, look, I'm here just to turn on the lights, turn off the lights, whatever it might be. Again, I never saw anything, but always heard different things. The very sort of last story, and this was actually towards my end at the Owens Thomas house. I was closing up the house, and and one of the last tasks after I turned off all the lights upstairs, you come down the stairs, and you'd open up the basement door, which at that time we didn't go down the basement stairs. I guess they might now. But you would open the basement stairs, and you would turn off the light that would turn off the light in the kitchen, the working kitchen to the house, and where the cistern had been. And now it's definitely renovated, I know. Yeah. But at that time we didn't we went into the kitchen on the basement floor, but you didn't go back into the cistern area. And so, but you had to turn off the light because you could see it. Mm-hmm. And so I'd open the door, and I would always yell down because I followed the last tour through the house and would shut off things as I went. That means also I didn't have to be in the house by myself for too long, so didn't freak myself out. But I would always follow them out. Well, they had already gone, and I was like, oh, let me turn off these lights. So I opened the basement door, and it opened in, and I leaned down, and I yelled, hey, Chris, are you gone? Like, make sure no one's down there. Because sometimes people would try to be sneaky and stay behind or whatever. I'm like, that's on you if you want to stay behind. I don't know what's going to happen after we leave. And I leaned down and yelled, hey, Chris, are you down there? Are you gone? And I didn't hear anything. And then I went to turn off the light. And as I went to close the door, I hear, hello, like an older female voice. And I knew Chris, I used that name. It wasn't Chris, but I used that name as an example because I knew the last two tours had been male docents. So I knew there was nobody down. I knew there wasn't a female docent down there. And I was like, Chris, is that you? And then I named another lady. I said, Paulette, are you down there? And nothing. And I said, well, I'm going to turn off the lights. We're closing up now. And as I went to close the door, hello. And it was a very distinct, I said hello, like a question. This person, this thing, whatever, this spirit was like, hello, hello, like a uptick. And it sounds funny to say, but it sounded like an older African-American woman, which is who worked in the kitchen down there. There was, I think, Diane and Stacy, I want to say. I can't remember all of them. I know Diane was one, who was the main house cook. I don't know if it was her or not, but I was like, well, I'm closing up now, so if you need to leave, if you were on the tour and you need to leave, now's the time. You can come up these stairs, but I'm closing up. And she didn't say anything else. I said, okay, well, we'll see you in the morning. And I just shut the door and turned off the lights and went on out the door. And I was like, all right. And I told a couple docents the next day about it, and that's when I had heard it was probably Diane. Because and that was something where that's where she would have been most of the time, in that working kitchen. And I know they did I think they did it with Cosmos Mariner Productions. They did a great video. It was Dinner with President Polk. Had Jim Marekis in it. A bunch of the docents were in it, and they did there's a great scene in there where they show the servants and the slaves in the kitchen getting ready for the dinner. Oh, okay. And that one of them is represented by Diane. So that's what it reminded me. When I saw that later on, I was like, that's exactly what it reminded me of. Like, in my head, when that happened, that's who I pictured in my head down there. And I was like, well, I don't know if it's Diane or not, but I'm leaving. So, and that was kind of it. And that was towards the end. And I was like, all right, I'm good.
So I'm really happy to hear these experiences, because I honestly don't have a ton of experience with the Owens Thomas house. Wasn't a part of, the houses that I would work in and things like that. So I had always, from the times that I'd been in it, I just felt I'm it's an active house, but it's not there's not one spirit in particular that's being very, rambunctious or things like that. So I'm glad to hear,
it's had lots of lives. It's had lots of lives.
And it sounds like it. It just sounds like it's a lot of energy that's still kind of flowing through, and you're just feeling the presence of it. And some of them are a bit more intelligent than others, which I think is a good talking point with, the historic houses of Savannah, because, that's kind of the case with a couple of them. It's the same way with the Davenport house. It's, it's just a bunch of different entities that are kind of just flowing through. But people tend to think that, when a house is haunted, especially a historic home, they're like, oh, it's just going to be the matriarch of the house, or it's, the family that lived there the whole time, it's them still there. And I'm like, no, it's usually not like that.
I mean, it's several people, because truth be told, the one that lived there the longest was Margaret Thomas. And people say they see her in the garden and things like that. I never saw anything. I mean, absolutely, if I were her, I would certainly haunt the garden. It's one of the nicest gardens in town. No one is buried there. I know y'all talked about that a couple weeks ago, too. Yes. She is not buried in the garden. No one is buried in the garden. Maybe a family pet or something, but not to my knowledge. No one is buried in the garden. But, I mean, and I know she used to dress up in her I guess, mother or grandmother's attire and have tea parties in the garden. And so people think that that's maybe that's what the tour guides always told me. Was the docents was like, somebody surely probably saw her in there and said, oh, it's her ghost haunting it. And no, it's not. So.
Another interesting thing about your story is something that I hear repeated a lot when people have like recurring and regular ghost encounters is the fact that we're compelled to narrate what we're doing, that we're compelled to say, I'm just making lunch, I'm just going to go in here, I'm just doing this. And it does harken back to this thing where by communicating with the spirit, you can actually neutralize its activity because you are interacting, because you're actively saying that you acknowledge their presence, that you're giving them leeway, that, and in many occasions, I used to work at the Savannah Theater and we do this all the time because we don't want to be either distracted or, boogity. So we would say, George, we're just, here for rehearsal. George, we're just, doing this. And it's a very natural sensation that if you think there's something there to talk to it, and you usually kind of create this friendly tone where you're just basically like, I'm just going about my business so that there's no interference with what you're trying to do. And you're being respectful of the environment. And it does seem to help. At very least, it alleviates anxiety. Sometimes you'll have this anxiety, and it's like if you just kind of talk it out. A bit of advice, ghost tip, is talk to the spirit or to the sensation, even if it's just your own, sensation. Even if it's just something internalized. By saying something, you are engaging. You're being a part of a solution to your and when it's internal, it's oogity boogities. So or oogie woogies.
No, it's woogity woogities.
Woogity woogities.
Yes.
I was like, I know I coined it, but I don't know what it was.
Is that different than the heebie-jeebies?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So
yes.
It's funny though that like you bring that up, that people will talk to the ghosts and stuff. I am very much so a person that like if a ghost is following me around, I'm like, the least you can do is assist me. It's like, it's
you can help me out, that'd be great.
Well, so it's funny because how you were talking about how they would unplug lamps or turn lamps on or something. When I would have to be in the Davenport house when I was working for a certain tour company in Savannah, I would be in there at the beginning of the night, plugging in all the lamps in those hidden crevices and whatnot. And I'm like always in the dark, like with my flashlight, like, where is the plug? Where's
halfway behind a bed or something?
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so it would be the same way at the end of the night. But the kid ghosts in Savannah are always very active in general.
Luckily, I've never been experienced a kid ghost other than Lottie, and I'm not sure how old she is.
Sure.
So,
yeah, I love kid ghosts.
Younger.
Right, exactly. I love kid ghosts personally. I'm a big fan of them. But but there's tons of them in the Davenport house, and they would always be following me throughout the house while I'm trying to do this. And like I was wearing like a big Victorian gown and stuff for the character and whatnot, and they'd be pulling on my skirt, and I'm like, okay, so y'all can do that, but you see me struggling here. And I would talk to them. I'd be like, y'all see me over here dealing with this, and you will not help me plug this in. I know you know where they are, but
you
here
see me do it every day. Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, I think it's funny when you do have that natural instinct to talk to them, because sometimes it does help, because, immediately I'll see like, oh, there's the cord. And it's almost like somebody laid it out in front of me. Like, okay, sure. We'll stop pulling on your skirt. Here's your cord, lady.
Here you go.
I don't know what it does, but yeah.
Right. They're like, this is what you want.
That was part of it too, is why I would tell them, I'm just turning on lights, or I'm just doing whatever, because I'm thinking because I wasn't sure always who it was or what time frame they were in.
Right.
Maybe they didn't have electricity.
Yeah.
Now, when Thomas House had plumbing, was the first house in Savannah to have plumbing, indoor plumbing. I know Hamilton Turner was the first to have electricity. So I was like, maybe they didn't understand what electricity was. So I'm just letting you know, I'm turning on the lights or whatever it might be. I'm closing this door. I'm locking it.
Right.
I'm shutting the shutters, whatever.
Yeah. It's fascinating, because it becomes second nature when you suspect a place is haunted to kind of, narrate your day to allow for, this is what I'm doing. This is like, it's okay. I'm not here to do any damage or hurt anything or steal anything or.
Well, and I know that I know y'all had mentioned Jim Williams a couple episodes ago, maybe even last episode with the Mercer Williams house, and he actually had an experience at the Owens Thomas house as well when it was a boarding house. I think it was a boarding house at the time, and it was mentioned in the Savannah Specters book.
Okay.
So I'd have to go back and look at it, but I remember when y'all were talking about him, I was like, wait a minute, he had an experience at the Owens Thomas house too. So I remember jotting that down. So
I always find it funny when people talk about Jim Williams because he was so staunch in his ghosts aren't real at the very beginning, and then he started having all these ghost experiences, and I'm just like,
you're like, interesting.
Interesting. Why is that the case, Jim? Well,
when you kill a man, who knows what happens?
Right.
Who knows what follows you around after that?
Exactly.
Well, and his trade was to renovate all these old houses, and that always kicks up whenever you're renovating. You hear all these stories of people when they start messing around with the internal workings of a house. That's going to stir up energy. No matter what you believe, you're changing the flow of energy in a house when you move a wall or even repair a wall. You're actively meddling with how the energy flows through the house, and so it stirs up something. Something is
restoring it back to its original.
Oh,
I think
especially
that's what happened with the slave quarter. Putting it back the way it was when it was most active.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
So that makes a huge difference, I think, too.
So on a different property owned by the Telfair, the Academy building. So when I first became a tour guide in Savannah, I was told by one of my trainers that because he knew I was an actress, he's like, oh, you can't go in that building. And I was like, why not? And he's like, Mary Telfair hates actresses. She hates actresses. And I was just like, okay. Sure. And so,
sure. I guess.
So the company that I worked for, they had they had Mary Telfair in the script and things like that. And I remember reading it, and I'm like, this just seems wrong for her hauntings and things of that nature, where she made they moved her portrait and the ceiling collapsed on them or things like that. So would you like to set the record straight?
I can set some of them straight, absolutely. No, I can set some of them straight for sure. I worked there for a while, and it's a family affair because my father-in-law also worked there. My mother-in-law worked at the Owens Thomas house. My father-in-law worked at the Telfair Academy. And if you want to if you want to read a good book, just sidebar quickly, on Mary Telfair, pick up Charles Johnson's book. It's probably sold in the gift shop at the Academy, at the Jepson, and at the Owens Thomas house. It is phenomenal. He has since passed away, but he was like the authority on Mary Telfair. Okay. He spoke on C-SPAN about it. I mean, all kinds of things. There are parts that are kind of dry, but it's a big book, and she was very interesting. She was very, very conservative. I had never heard that she didn't like actresses. I've never heard that.
I don't know where that came from.
There. She did not like alcohol. She did not want alcohol served in her house. That was part of the will when she passed away and left it to the Georgia Historical Society, was that no alcohol be served and no parties be held. So that frivolity, she was not down for frivolity at all.
Which fits into the actress.
Right. Yeah, that
especially of the period.
Of the period, absolutely. Now she would do book readings or play readings, but they were probably very dry plays and dry poetry and things like that. Like I said, nothing frivolity. So when they added on to the building, they have the rotunda now, which is where her portrait sits, and it is always set there as far as I know. As far as I've always seen it. And I even went there as a child when they had the little reflecting pool in the bottom of the sculpture garden. It's not there anymore. But it's always been there. I have heard that happened, but when you're doing any kind of renovation, the chance of, if you move something as big, if you've ever seen the portrait, it is humongous. Everything in the rotunda is huge. There's the La Parabola, there's the Black Prince of Crecy. They're huge pieces. And actually, even above that, there are pieces that you can't see that have been covered up. I think they may have been restored now, but they were covered up at one time, and you can see them in older pictures. So if they're moving this portrait that's humongous, because I think at one point, if you look at older pictures, it's right in the center, as you come up the stairs into the rotunda, but now it's off to the side over a piano. And it seems to have been fine there. I did not have any experiences with anything falling off the wall. But I would assume if you're moving something like that, it's possible that something did fall in. Because, I mean, it's a glass ceiling. You know, at one point, there was nothing above it. It let the light in. Now they have lights above it. But so, I mean, it's possible that something did happen when they moved it, and they just chalked it up to it being moved.
Sure.
But it should always be I think that's also just the respect. It's the Academy building, the Telfair Academy, so it needs to be in a place of honor.
Exactly.
You know.
Yeah.
At one point, I think it did hang behind the front desk.
I was going to say, there was a time when it was behind the front desk,
maybe.
and I want to say that there was a sensation a lot of people had that it was just wrong.
It just didn't.
Yeah.
That was the house.
Right.
So she would have lived in that part. And so for her portrait to be there.
Seems like vanity for.
She
from
probably
her
would have thought it was
point, yeah.
very vain or very ostentatious or
Right.
facetious to be like that.
Right.
So
She's a wild woman. She really is. Yes.
very interesting.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
She's
Ahead of her time for sure.
Definitely. She had a lot of really great things about her, but I do think it's hilarious that she left in her will about the Telfair Hospital. And how, I don't know if we've talked about this on the podcast yet,
I feel
but
like we did.
maybe
Yeah,
mentioned
just
it.
mentioned it,
Yeah,
passive.
but basically, Mary left behind like all these rules of like what she wanted done when she passed in her will. She wrote like one thing for the Telfair Hospital that was because she was an advocate for women to have a good place to, you know, have healthcare and things like that. So including that, if you're born a girl in the Telfair Hospital, you are welcome to be there for as much as you need. You can get all the treatments done, all that if you need that. Stay with your mother. But if you're born a boy, she wrote that you had to be out in 3 days. And I think that is so crazy. And they still do it.
Well, I think that because at that time, boys or boy babies, male babies, would have already been assumed to be receiving the best treatment.
Sure.
They'd get home and they'd be doted on and everything else, whereas girls at that time, or as she saw it, because she had lived her whole life, never been married, never had any children. She did a lot for her sister's husband, William Hodgson. You know, she built the Georgia Historical Society for him, or that building for him, in honor of him, things like that. So, I mean, but I think she was like, it wasn't a malicious thing, like, no, boys, get out. But you've already got to step up in the world. So you can go on, and I'm going to dote on the girls and the mamas here.
We actually talked about it with the when we were talking about the morgue tunnels.
Oh, that's it. Yes.
Because conceptually, the tunnels were connected, like from the Mary Telfair Hospital, as legend goes. But it was because the Candler Hospital was, you know, a short distance. If there was some kind of emergency or anything with a boy, it was close enough. But
just go over there.
Just go shoot.
I just remember working with a coworker at a different tour company, and he was like, "Oh, that's true. I was born at the Telfair Hospital, and they kicked me out within 3 days."
Really?
Yeah,
Oh, funny.
It's because he's an older gentleman at this point, and so he was like, "Yep, it's true. I was out." So
I work at a retirement community, and we have a lot of folks who are like, "Oh yeah, I was born at Telfair Hospital," and
Right.
they tell us stuff like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So.
it's so comical though. But so. Did any of your family members ever have any paranormal experiences within the Academy building?
My father-in-law, he was a maintenance tech, and he was always one of the first ones there. 6:30, 7:30 in the morning, he'd be there, and he would come in the back door. So the way the building was, the original house was the front half, where the like upper and lower galleries are and the entryway are. Then you have the staircase on the front side of the elevator kind of portal, I guess, or elevator alcove. And then there's the rotunda and the sculpture gallery. And behind that, I think was maybe like it was like the landing space for the original carriage house probably, but we're not really sure. Because there was a garden where the rotunda and sculpture gallery are now. That would have been their working garden. So there was a workspace similar to the Owens Thomas house built by the same people, William J. So it would have had a similar feel to it. So I don't know if it was servants' quarters or slave quarters or maybe a carriage house. We're not really sure. I'm not really sure. I'm sure the people who work there now probably know, but I don't.
Sure.
And he would come in that back door because obviously the front part of the building is alarmed. So he would come in, turn off the alarms. And that one is 4 stories. And it has a basement as well that is the staff kitchen now. And so he would come in, and he said he would hear conversations going on, knowing no one's in the room, no one's in the building. I was gonna say house. No one's in the building because he just let himself in. So he would go in and again, turning on lights, going up the stairs, whatever. And he would kind of stay in the back part of the building for a while, turning on his workshop and things. And then he would step into like the sculpture gallery to turn off those, and he would hear like cooking going on in the summer, I say summer kitchen, in the working kitchen of the house, which is set up, I haven't been there recently, but I think it's still set up like a kind of a display artifact kitchen as if it were, and there's a picture of her longtime cook in the kitchen area. So he would walk towards it, and he said he would hear like almost like and I don't want to say pots and pans because that sounds metal, but for them it would have been like a skillet. And he's from the country. He won't mind me saying that. He's from the country, so he knows what a skillet sounds like, cast iron skillet. He said it was heavy, like you could hear it
like
hitting
clunk,
the thing,
right?
like clunk,
Yeah.
and people talking and like movement. And then he'd get there, of course, there's nobody there, and he'd be like, okay. So he'd turn on, go on, but this was all happening in the dark. And it's downstairs, and in the winter, it's still dark, you know? So he's like turning on lights, whatever. And then as he would leave, again, he would start to hear the sensors go off, ding, ding, like someone's leaving the kitchen. Because at this point, they're working in the kitchen. Almost like they were following him or at least stepping out to watch him walk away. And he's like, I'm just here to turn on the lights. You can go on with your business. Go on making breakfast. Right. Again, talking to him, making it feel okay. And then when he would go upstairs, he could still hear it, which, I mean, when you're in the building by yourself, it is a big building, you're still going to hear things. I forever heard footsteps. I'd be there by myself sometimes on occasions. I did mostly events there. So I'd be there before an event, after an event, late at night, whatever. And I would hear doors opening and closing, footsteps on those back stairs especially, because they're wooden. So, and that's where Carl Brandt, the original director, the first director after Mary Telfair passed, that's where he lived. He had renovated it, I believe, and lived in like an upstairs floor, which is now offices. But you would hear the doors opening and closing, and there's a back staircase that you can use. It's very narrow. I hated it because I was always like, I'm going to tumble down these stairs and break my neck. But you would go down multiple flights, 4 little flights of stairs to the kitchen, staff kitchen, and you could hear people walking behind you. And you think it's okay, it's just wooden, it's creaking because I'm on it. I'm a chunky girl, I'm heavy-footed, whatever. And nope, it was just, you'd stop and you'd still hear someone walking behind you. But it was, again, never scary, never anything like that. He heard most things. On occasion, he would see things. It was always, and I had this note on there, many people, longtime receptionist, and again, I'm not naming names because they didn't give me permission to, but the longtime receptionist, several front desk concierge, some of the housekeepers, my father-in-law, would always catch like the tail end of someone moving, dressed in attire. Now, we didn't dress in attire all the time. Like if we were doing an event or something, we had a few staff members that had period attire and would dress up like they did at the Owens Thomas house for some of their things, or at the Davenport house, like you said. But it would be like the tail end of a dress going in, or somebody had said they saw like a tweed pants. I mean, to see it, that it was tweed, like to see that texture. And she was at the front desk, and this person was going into the oak room, that little octagon-shaped oak room to the left when you come in, and it was like a study. And she said saw like the back of a coat, the leg, and like a boot or a dress shoe go into the room. And because she was like, no, who's in there? Like, you're not supposed to go that far in.
Right.
You're supposed to stand at the door. And she was like, oh, who was that? And she like ran, you had to run around the desk instead of just going out the side. She had to go all the way around the desk, and there's no one in there. And she could see it, like she had her eye on it the whole time. No one in there.
Wow.
So I mean, anybody who saw something would see that. I never saw
I was going to say,
anything.
I've heard that account, account of the fleeting glimpse of someone passing into,
But clear
and
enough
on
that
all
she
levels
could say
too.
It
Yeah,
was a tweed pair of pants and a jacket.
Yeah.
Like that clear.
Yeah,
Blew my mind.
And it is.
So I was like,
I've heard. There's a man and there's a woman.
I think
I hadn't heard the kitchen, but that's kind of cool because
That is.
that's another thing. A lot of kitchens in old houses have that meal prep sensation.
Yes.
The sound. I'm called to the 1790
That's
has
what
a lot of
that's
stories
what I was thinking.
of the kitchen prep and the kitchen, and the defensive ghost of a kitchen, because kitchens were like were like offices.
That was their
and
space.
There was someone in charge of the kitchen, and nobody is allowed to just walk into a kitchen and start doing things without the permission or without the guidance of that person. So that's an interesting thing. But yeah, the Telfair Academy's ghosts were hard to pin down. Almost everybody is certain that Mary's there, without a doubt. But there is a gentleman, which raises a lot of questions, because it's like, what gentleman would that be?
I think there might be two, actually.
Oh, I'm listening.
And that sort of segues into my last part of that story. But I think that my coworker, the one at the concierge desk, I think she may have seen Alexander Telfair, which is Mary's brother.
Right.
He lived there for a while until he got married, and then he moved away or whatever, and she stayed in the house. And then I think that there also might be Carl Brandt, and that's who I think is in the back of the building, because Mary and Alexander would have not gone into the servants' quarters.
Right.
There would have been a reason for them to be there. Maybe the carriage house, if it was a carriage house at one point, like if they had and maybe they put them there during the day, horses and things, and then took them elsewhere at night. But they wouldn't have been back there typically, but Carl Brandt would have been, because he lived there in the top floor for a long time. He was the director for a while. And I was there one night, closing up, last one there. I think we had security at the time, but he was waiting outside the back door for me, because I was closing up everything and was headed back through the rotunda, and we were going to go out the back door. And so I was in the front of the house, the front of the building, and I was in the upper galleries, and turning off lights, things like that, making sure everything's where it needs to be. And I went into if you're looking at the alcove, or looking at the front of the building, it was the right-hand top one. And there's a little alcove in the back of it that you go in to get in the elevator. And I wasn't going to go down the elevator, I was going to go down the stairs, but I just kind of stuck my head in there, and I was going to tap the elevator, make sure nobody was in there, there was no garbage in there or anything like that. And so I stepped in, and I felt like somebody came up right behind me, and I thought maybe it was the security guard, and like, A, trying to play tricks on me, but B, also just following me through the building, which they would do sometimes. So I had stepped up, and I was just going to reach in and hit the elevator door, not go all the way in the alcove. And like I said, it felt like somebody came up right behind me, and I stepped back, like to just step back out of the alcove, and it was so solid and so like firm that, I bounced like off of it. It was that, like I felt like I stepped on their foot and I bounced off of them, and I turned around to say, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, because I backed up with force and I bounced off of them with force. I surely would have knocked whoever it was backwards, and there was no one there. Not a soul.
Wow.
And I was like, and this sounds really weird, because this is the closest I've ever come to seeing anything there. It looked like, and this sounds funny, it looked like when Harry Potter is in the invisibility cloak.
Oh, sure. Yes.
Sure.
I know that sounds funny, but that's the only thing. And I didn't think that then, because I didn't know what to call it, because this was a while ago. But it was like...
That's the Predator.
It was, I don't know what it was, but it was like a shimmer. I couldn't see anything, but it was like the air was shimmer, almost like a when it's hot on the concrete, a mirage or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was like, and then it felt literally like something just like a fan turned on, and it blew it towards the glass doors going into the landing out of, because the galleries have doors on them, and the doors even like rattled.
Interesting.
Like not just like somebody had walked through them, I guess is the best way. A breeze blew through them. Excuse me. And then on the other side, I could see almost like a black and white sepia tone type image of a man in a suit, dark pants, dark jacket, but he didn't look as like distinguished as I would think Alexander Telfair would have looked.
Sure,
he looked more modern.
Right.
Okay.
That's fair.
So I think it was Carl Brandt for sure, because
that makes perfect sense.
It does.
That's where he would have been. He would have been in the gallery space as well, multiple times, certainly checking after an event or something like that, because they did host galleries and salons and things like that in those upper rooms. So I was like, okay. And then, so I walked, I was moving pretty quickly for being so shocked, and I walked out and I opened the doors real quick, because I'm thinking, Well, did somebody like blow something in the doors at me? Like, I'm just thinking like, what could this have been? And of course nothing's there. And I was like, and I looked down the big staircase into the rotunda to see if like my security guard's there or anything. He's not there. And I was just like, I said, well, Carl, we're leaving. Again, I'm justifying my reasoning being there.
Yes.
I said, I was just checking to make sure nobody was here. We're leaving. We're going out the back door. We'll see you later. And I just left. But that was the closest I've ever come to seeing something. But it was almost like a projection.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
I had clearly backed into him. He had walked through those doors, and I saw the tail end of it.
That's such a fascinating story. And it's such a cool story too. But like I do always say, you know, sometimes you do have spirits that you can't necessarily pinpoint down to a location. And what I always like to tell people when we can't figure out who it is, I'm like, think about it. If you got to choose where you wanted to haunt, it's not going to be like, you know, some random field or something. You know, I'm going to pick a historic home. I want to live in those houses.
Forever.
So it's like, right.
I want to be there forever.
Also, and we talked about this during our grave face investigation, paintings, artwork. This is a lot of energy, a lot of focus, a lot of things. You know, I remember there were countless stories about the Black Prince painting and people's sensations about being in front of this painting and dealing with a kind of almost a supernatural unease looking at this painting. And I'm like, you know, when you're dealing with art, many artists are hypersensitive and have a type of empathy and a type of spiritual energy. And as they're transferring it to their expression, what you're looking at is a conversation with a long dead person. You know, the painting is that person trying to put forth an idea or a concept or present an idea, and you're receiving it. So a lot of times, and I think museums are oftentimes haunted by just the remnant of that creative process, you know, because a lot of artists are tortured. A lot of artists are pulling from a deep well of emotion to create these things. And so having them on display and out for people to consume oftentimes can feed whatever small traces of the energy that is imparted. So there was when I first moved here, there was a lot of talk about that painting being, you know, a haunted painting. Because it's a haunting painting.
It's a haunting image altogether,
right.
And the more you look at it, you back up and you see, it's almost like that scene of Ferris Bueller where they get down to like the dots, but in this it's reverse. You step back and you back further and further and you see more and more and more and more and more. I never got a bad vibe from that painting. It is haunting an image.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say necessarily bad. It's just impactful.
It's 100% impactful. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I always felt more drawn to the picture. It used to be right next to it, I don't know if it's still there or not, where it was a woman like sad on a table and the gentleman is reading the letter, and it's assumed it's called a letter home, I think, that they're getting bad news that her husband has been killed in war or whatever. That one always was just like, oh, like I always felt, I love the painting, it's beautiful, but I'm always just like, oh.
It's melancholy.
It is.
Very melancholy. And maybe that being next to the Black Prince is a lot.
Right, it adds to that.
And it's in the dark rotunda.
And that whole rotunda is kind of like,
But we always say, like, Mary's
journey.
portrait always hangs right there, and at the end of the night, we're always like, good night, Mary.
Right.
See you later. But she likes to ride the elevator is what we heard. The elevator goes up and down, no one in
fun.
it. Things like that.
That's cute. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much, Jessica, for coming on and sharing your like wealth of stories. No, this is excellent. So if y'all enjoyed this, definitely make sure to check out our next episode that we're having. We're going to have Jessica on. We're going to talk about the Forsyth Park Inn because she used to work there as well. So we're going to
everywhere.
Exactly. That's very Savannah of you. Yes. You know, so it's we're going to dive into that in the next episode. So definitely make sure to check that out. If you don't already follow us on social media, make sure you do that. We're on TikTok under we're not. That's Instagram. Excuse me. It's Haunted City Podcast on TikTok. And then on Instagram, it's the most haunted city on earth. Also, you can find us on Patreon under the Savannah Underground. We have merch. We have all those things on our website. Also, I'm going to be putting out some different blog posts pretty soon. So definitely make sure to check out our website, hauntedcitypodcast.com. So with that, thank you guys again. We really appreciate y'all for listening and being very loyal fans and whatnot. But my name is Madison Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susi.
And stay spooky, y'all.